Yo, what's up guys? In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to take your MIDI drums from sounding like this to sounding like this. During this video, I'm going to be breaking this process down in what I believe to be the 6 essential stages of realistic drum MIDI production. Each stage will level up your drum MIDI production more and more as we progress throughout this video. And in my opinion, the very final stage is one of the most essentials when it comes to realistic drum MIDI production. And it's one that I don't think I've seen covered in any YouTube video, so I would definitely stick around for the last one. And the very last thing before we get into this video, please do not skip the steps. These are meant to go in order. If you skip all the way to step 6, you're gonna miss all the steps before it. You're not gonna know how we got here and how we got to a realistic sounding drum pattern. Just make sure that you follow this video in chronological order. Also, somebody in the last video told me I need to make my bed. There you go, dude. You're welcome. Stage 1 is gonna be the drummer's mindset. Now I know a lot of you are probably like, to one of these guys, one of these mindset gurus who's like, oh dude, all you have to do is believe and then you could do it or whatever. It's not like that, right? What I mean when I say get into the drummer's mindset is an overwhelming majority of tutorials for production, specifically related to trap production. That's just, you know, the times that we live in. It's also an amazing gateway to learn production, but that doesn't really help you when you're trying to make realistic drum pattern midis that sound like real acoustic sets. So that means you're gonna have to do a little bit of extra work. And when I say get into the drummer's mindset, I basically mean studying the culture of, you know, live bands, live recorded songs, and stuff like that. Watch all of your favorite artists playing live, whatever genre you want to replicate. Listen to your favorite artists within that genre and really just like study and break down the drums, how they sound, how they play, everything like that, and it's going to help you out tenfold. Honestly, if you want to go the extra mile, I don't think it would hurt to actually watch drum lessons for some of your favorite songs, even if you don't have an actual drum set. You know, chances are if you had an actual drum set, you wouldn't be here trying to figure out how to make your drum MIDI sound real. But even if you just watch 1 or 2 videos, it will really help you understand the world of real live drumming and how it is slightly different from MIDI programming. That drummer's mindset, you know, shifting gears and imagining yourself being a live drummer trying to replicate what they do into a DAW is going to help you a lot. You never know, it might give you a lot of insight. Stage number 2 is going to be sound selection. Now this stage of the video is probably going to be where you see the most noticeable change from like a bad pattern to a good pattern. So for example, here is our original drum pattern. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is switch out this pattern for the One Kit Wonder metal drum set within Contact. Already, night and day, it's going to sound like this. Sound selection is just one of those things that takes time. You're going to have to really, again, get into the drummer's mindset like I said earlier. See, I told you I wasn't just being some weird mindset guru. For the sake of this video, I'm going to make this a bit easier for you and recommend my personal favorite sources to find really good drum sounds. As I just said, for this video, I'm using the One Kit Wonder metal Contact bank. It sits at around $60, which in my opinion is an absolute steal. You don't even have to own like the full Contact. You don't have to pay for that. You can just use the free Contact player. So it's $60. You get the full set and like a VST to use it in. Pretty much anything from the One Kit Wonder company is going to be really good. They have metal. I don't know what Architects is. They have aggressive rock. They have pop punk. They have modern fusion, dry and funky, classic rock. I'm also going to recommend Circle's drum samples if you guys aren't familiar with them. They also do Contact banks, and I'm pretty sure you could also get their sounds as one-shot waveforms. So if you're more comfortable just using like the piano roll with waveforms instead of like an actual VST, that's amazing for you. They have some of the most unique sounds in my opinion, just really cool stuff. Now let's say you're looking to make a different kind of genre. Maybe you're looking to do some like softer indie, you know, homemade type of production. Maybe you want to do something darker like post-punk. You guys can go ahead and check out my Machine Classics pack. It's 100% free. I just went ahead and sampled the Roland TR-505 and the Lindrum. For anybody who doesn't know, for those kind of like indie, Russian post-punk and dark wave genres, these are the specific drum machines that they use. So I just wanted to go ahead ahead and give you guys a free resource. If that's the kind of production you're into, if you want to make songs like Current Joys, Ecstasy, I Dress, Molchatoma, you can even use these sounds for some like softer indie songs. Go ahead, click that link down below. That's 100% free. Sound selection, very important. Stage 3, make a better pattern. Kind of going back to stage 1 again with the drummer mindset, your patterns will probably immediately get better if you really study real people playing real drums. In the before and after that I'm using in this video, you'll notice that the before is very much like a new producer watching some like Nick Mira tutorials and they think that that's going to help them make realistic drum midis, and it doesn't really work that way. So when you really study real people playing real drums and you try to replicate those patterns, it's really going to level up your progressions. I know this is kind of like a silly step and you're probably like, obviously I want to play a better pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys how I would make a better pattern. The before drum pattern that we have is very basic, it's very bland, and there's not a lot going on. The very first thing I'm going to do is add more kicks, because realistically the first pattern is just, it's like empty. So I'm going to add more kicks. Then I'm going to go ahead and add some crashes to make it sound realistic and, you know, just feel like there's more going on. And yeah, that's actually about it. We're not going to do too much because you can make some very minor tweaks and turn your pattern into something that sounds very realistic. I'm actually going to leave the snare alone because we're going to sauce this up a little bit in the next stage, which is stage 4, velocity, pitch, and realistic playing. If you guys are liking this video so far, it would be greatly appreciated if you guys can go ahead and show me by leaving a like on this video and maybe clicking subscribe for future educational videos. If you have any topics that you want me to cover in the future, go ahead and leave a suggestion down in the comments. Let's get back to the video. Step number 1 here is going to be velocity. You're going to want to alter the velocity on each individual sound. Personally, I like to go ahead and hand pick them and kind of like, you know, adjust the velocity slider as I feel necessary. Imagine we're playing a real acoustic drum set. No two notes are going to be hit at the same velocity. For anybody who doesn't know, velocity is basically like the speed and intensity in which you actually like play your instrument. With guitars, drums, and basses, all that kind of stuff, the harder you hit it, the more twangy and sharp it's going to sound. The softer you hit it, the more soft it's going to sound, obviously. So to create that realistic feel, we're going to go into our DAW and we're going to take each individual note and we're just going to vary the velocity slightly. For something like a snare, I wouldn't add too much velocity because typically people are hitting it pretty consistently. For hats and rides, this is really where you're going to want to utilize velocity. Usually when people are using their rides or hats, they're doing this alternating velocity that you might see replicated in a lot of trap production. You definitely want to do this for a lot of your cymbals. For your kicks, again, no two kick is going to be hitting exactly the same. The kick and the snare are typically the most consistent within a song. And then if you have any kick notes that are super close together, you could take the first one and lower the velocity a lot. That will create that kind of like boom boom. It's going to sound like this. Now we're going to go over pitch. With your cymbals specifically, you're going to want to just very, very slightly adjust the pitch in your DAW. Hitting a cymbal in real life at different intensities can very slightly adjust the pitch up or down. You do not want to be going crazy. You don't want to be going whole octaves down or even a semitone. That might be a little bit too much. Just very slightly tweak each individual note to have some different velocities to add some more realism. I think velocity and pitch are the most important things to adjust, but within your DAW, you can actually mess around with, you know, the panning, the velocity, the pitch, and just all those options that they give you until you get something that you think sounds very realistic. And that's going to move us over to realistic playing. So this is probably my favorite part of the video. The first thing I'm going to do for realistic playing is add some flams. For anybody who doesn't know, a flam is basically when you have a snare and instead of just hitting it one time, you take both of your hands and you hit it slightly off time, so it's kind of like this is what it's going to look like in your DAW. Flams are not very easy to replicate inside of a DAW. You can actually get some drum one-shots that are sampled flams if you want to do that, or you can just try to replicate it like I do. And now we're going to get to the realistic playing part. So this is actually pretty easy. Again, step 1, drummer's mindset. Let's think about this. Does a drummer ever play anything perfectly 100% on time? No, unless they're like a robot, maybe. Basically, a lot of people who get into production, they see a DAW, it has like, you know, a very specific time-locked grid, everything snaps to time, and you're like, okay, well, yeah, I'm gonna put my drums perfectly where they're supposed to go. No, I'm pointing a lot this video. I don't know why I'm doing that. You don't want to do that if you want to create realistic sounding drums. What you actually want to do sounds pretty counterintuitive, but you want to kind of create that like human flawed sound. So I'm going to show you how I do this in my DAW. It's actually very easy. You're going to go ahead and look at each individual note in your drum pattern. pattern. You're gonna hover over it and you're just gonna move it so slightly. Like you could see on the screen, I am barely touching this. In my DAW, specifically FL Studio, all I have to do is click it and then use the scroll wheel, and that will basically move it on the smallest possible increment. And then from there, I go through each individual note and I just move them slightly to the left or slightly to the right. Now you'll notice I am not making huge changes. When you move things slightly to the left or slightly to the right, it's gonna add that authentic, real human feel. And you'll know if you did this right or not when you re-listen to your pattern, because it shouldn't sound noticeable unless you know that it was done. You'll know if you did too much, if you're kind of like, oh, like this sounds a lot different. The way I like to put it is you want to sound like a good drummer with human swing and not like just a bad drummer. If you take this step too far and you make these time shifts too extreme, you're just going to sound bad, right? Like it's just not going to sound good. Stage 5, extend your pattern and add fills. I'm not going to go over this pattern too much because it's pretty self-explanatory and it's in the name, but when people are playing in real bands and they're doing real live recordings, they tend to add more variety within their repeating patterns by extending them. So let's say you're in your DAW and your pattern is only 4 to 8 bars. I would go ahead and extend it to 16 bars minimum, and if you're feeling very experimental and you want to add a lot of variety, you can bump it up to 32 bars. But basically, taking an 8 bar pattern and moving it over to a 16 bar pattern, you can take that second half of the pattern and add very, very slight varieties. Maybe you add one counter snare, maybe there's one part where you hit your kick twice instead of once, or maybe you switch over from a ride to a hat. Maybe instead of just playing hats, you start the second half off with a crash. It will just further elevate that feel that this is a real person playing the drums. And then drum fills. You extend your pattern, you can end your pattern off with a drum fill. If you want to add a lot of different fills throughout your track at different spots, you can make your drum fills in their own individual pattern and then just put them into your actual project file wherever you feel the need to. Adding drum fills is another thing that is going to very further elevate your drum patterns. All right, we've reached the final step of this video. Step 6, secret sauce that I don't see hardly anybody talking about: processing and mixing. So I'm going to go over mixing first because that's not exactly a secret. Basically, you're going to want to take all of your drums and you're going to want to send them to a bus so that whatever effects you apply are going to go to all of the drum sounds. That way you don't have to take all the same effects and put them to each individual mixer track. You're going to want to start off with some reverb. Personally, I use FL Studio and they have some pretty good default reverb presets. They have small room and drum room. You can adjust these settings accordingly. I like to actually take the mix knob and turn it down a bit because I feel like the reverb is a little bit intense when it's all the way at 100%. And then you're going to want to add some sort of compressor. You're basically going to want to use your compressor to kind of glue all the drums together and also add a little bit of saturation. This is not going to be specifically a, how to mix tutorial. This is more so like the steps that you can take to make your drums sound realistic. So if you guys want me to follow up this video with a tutorial on how to mix drums specifically, like turning each of the individual knobs on the reverb, compressor, and any other plugins that you might use, let me know. But at its core, I know it sounds very basic, but that's really all you need: a reverb and a compressor. Anything else is completely up to you. You can use something like RC20 or Isotope Vinyl if you want to go for a more vintage, lo-fi indie feel. Now for this very final secret mixing tip, I'm not gonna lie, this is gonna be a little bit hard to explain. I'm gonna break this down by explaining to you how a real drum set is recorded and how that might affect things. So within a real drum set, each individual part of the acoustic drum set is mic'd up. So you have a mic pointing towards the snare, you have a mic pointing towards each individual tom, you have a mic pointing towards the kick, you have a mic pointing towards all of the cymbals, and then typically you'll also have 2 more, which are things that people don't usually acknowledge, which is the overhead mics and then the room mic. So basically the overhead mic is going to kind of record like the panning of the individual drum set, like this is the left side and this is the right side, but it's also going to encompass like that full drum set feel. And then the room mic is actually my favorite thing to try to implement into my mix because a lot of people don't typically do it. Depending on the situation, a room mic is typically a more low quality microphone that's trying to encapsulate the sound of the room. So if your drum set is in one corner of your room, typically a lot of people will put the room mic on the other side. Now, of course, this depends on who's recording. You can move the mic all across the room. The room mic adds this sort of like saturation, I'd say. It adds, a very wet, acoustic, reverby feel to your mix. And yeah, basically you usually have each individual drum part being recorded, as well as the full kit, as well as the room. Now I'm going to explain to you where this mixing tip comes in. You would assume that when you're recording each individual drum part, there's gonna be some bleed, and you'd be correct. When you listen to individual tracks of your favorite songs, you'll probably notice that within the snare mic track, you can hear just a little bit of the kick or just a little bit of the hats. Within the kick track, you can hear just a little bit of the snares and cymbals. cymbals. Within the cymbal tracks, you can hear a little bit of the kick and the snare. You typically never get a perfectly 100% gated sound where all you hear is the snare or all you hear is the kick or, you know, different parts of the drum set, unless you're recording them individually, which usually doesn't happen. And this is a huge reason why acoustic drum mixes sound so full. It's not just because it's a drum set and, you know, the sounds are richer and fuller. It's because there's so many overlapping layers, you have no choice. It's gonna sound full. So that's part of the reason why you might make a drum pattern within your DAW and it still just doesn't sound full. It's because you have no realistic recording emulation. And that's where the hard part comes in. We're gonna have to try our best to emulate this. So for example, I'm gonna go ahead and play you my snare pattern completely soloed within the DAW. Now I'm going to go ahead and play you my snare pattern if I was trying to replicate the sound of an actual acoustic drum set being mic'd up with some of the background noise being picked up. Hopefully now this is making some sense to you. Basically, we're gonna do this for each individual track. This is extremely tedious and it's a lot of work. This is kind of where we reach the point where it would kind of be easier to do on an acoustic set, but the whole point of this video is you probably don't have an acoustic set, so we're gonna go that extra mile to try to replicate that realistic sound. Now I'm gonna go ahead and play you my kick pattern soloed. And now I'm gonna play you my kick pattern with some realistic bleed. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna take all of these tracks and we're gonna glue them together. Now there's two more steps. We're gonna get the overhead mics. I don't really like to go overboard with this. I like to keep it very simple. Basically what I do is I just take my original pattern. So all of the sounds playing together, just go ahead, plop that in there. That's close enough to a realistic overhead. It's gonna be picking up all of the sounds playing together. That's all you're gonna really wanna do. And then we're gonna replicate the room mic. There are multiple different ways that you can go about doing this, but typically what I would do is I would export your drum pattern as a WAV file and run it to its own individual bus where all the sounds are playing at once. And we're just gonna go ahead and play with some reverb. Like I said earlier, you can use some of these drum room presets within FL Studio. You can also go into certain plugins like Isotope Vinyl or RC20. You guys can check out my Prologue Alternative Rock drum kit. Within that drum kit, I have some RC20 presets that emulate room mics. I'm gonna go ahead and pick this preset and it's gonna take our drum pattern from sounding very bland and normal to sounding like this. Now, hopefully this gives you an idea of what a room mic should sound like. It's very verby, it's very drowned out. You want it to sound like it's kind of coming from, you know, very far away. We're trying to emulate a microphone that's far away from a drum set. And then we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna take it and we're gonna layer it over all of our different drum stems. And finally, we have our finished drum pattern. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope I was able to give you some insightful knowledge. This is definitely gonna be one of my more like educational, in-depth videos. So I apologize if it's not, you know, as like silly and funny as my other stuff is. But I just wanted to sit down and just kind of, you know, just get real, get raw, and give as much helpful educational tips as I could. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Peace.